The Human Development Report 2013 of the United Nations Development Programme was launched on the 15th of March 2013. The country report, of course, was launched on the 2nd of April 2013. Now, what is the content of this particular report in question? To discuss this and more, we have with us this evening Subnay Nandi, the UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative in Sri Lanka. A very good evening, sir, and welcome to Biz First in Focus. Starting off, sir, tell me, what is the contribution like of the United Nations Development Programme and the United Nations in Sri Lanka?
Firstly, thank you very much for showing the interest in the United Nations publication, and it's a pleasure for us. So through this interview also I bring greetings of the whole United Nations team to the people of Sri Lanka, all the viewers. I've been an avid viewer of your programs, particularly when disaster strikes, and you come very quickly on that. Now, coming back to your question, the partnership between Sri Lanka and United Nations, it's a very long partnership. It stretches beyond 60 years now. In fact, United Nations has been here before Sri Lanka formally became independent. Mm-hmm. Some agencies, for example, World Health Organization, United Nations Development Programme, they came in earlier days. Sri Lanka also has been a very active member of the United Nations. You know, you produced quite a number of outstanding leaders as at the level of the Under-Secretary Generals of the United Nations, leading the disarmament issues. So it has been a very engaged, fruitful partnership. Now, as to the role of the country team, different United Nations agencies operating in Sri Lanka, we accompanied the whole process of transformation, development and change in Sri Lanka. We'll talk probably later in the context of the Human Development Report that Sri Lanka has a tremendous story to tell in terms of the social progress, social development markers. And United Nations has been a partner, small, humble partner from day one. Coming to the recent set of work activities, I think over the last 5 or so years, the focus essentially was to work with our national partners in providing humanitarian support in the north and the east, in the conflict affected areas, and a whole group of United Nations agencies engaged were in the front line of that work. We worked with the government, with national partners in getting people out from the conflict affected areas to Menik Farm, and then over these last 4 years we have been also a steady partner with the government to bring them back into their home areas, to help them restore livelihoods. We work in different areas to set up the documentation and you name it. So from basic life-saving humanitarian work all the way to issues of rule of law and access to justice. This has been essentially very focused work in restoring livelihoods and lives in the north and the east, and working to come out. Now, as we speak, we have entered into a new phase. We have a new 5-year program that started this year. We are looking forward to see a transformed program. So from a very heavily humanitarian support to longer term development issues. And we are working, about 16 UN agencies are present in Sri Lanka. 5 agencies operate from elsewhere. So the combined effort of these 21 agencies, primarily in partnership with our national partners, ministries, academia, civil society organization. So we are formulating those new programs as we speak.
You took over office as a UNDP resident representative 2 years ago, sir. Are you satisfied with the manner in which Sri Lanka has progressed following the end of the conflict in 2009?
You see, there is not a very simple answer to that, because the task that you are talking about, this has been enormous, humongous. If you look at what Sri Lanka has achieved in resettling people, bringing them back from in Sri Lanka, there is no major camps at this point with IDP camps. Sri Lanka has done a fantastic job. I started going to, for example, the conflict affected areas in June 2011, and if I go now, much better, easier to get there, more flights, more roads, more electricity, things are there. So the The infrastructure has clearly improved significantly. Some would tell me that the investment that North and also East have seen over the last 4 years probably first surpasses the investment over the last 30 years. So of course that is visible. What is remaining challenge, and we call it residual challenges, and we are very closely working with our government partners that once you bring people back to their areas, it is they still need help with restoring their livelihoods. They need to get back. We have dealt with people who have seen multiple displacements, and then after 4 or 5 moves, now they are back to their area. So we have been working with the government on mine clearance. So you have to make these places safe. Then you bring them back. You need to provide them with housing, temporary and then hopefully permanent, schooling, water and sanitation, and gradually also them going back to the agriculture field or fisheries, whatever their professions or livelihoods are. So this is a slightly longer term process, and I don't think it will be right to expect that everything is solved in these 4 years. Then there are some issues. You see, the ethnic conflict also has a long legacy in a sense. There are some divides, and then divides have to be manned. We are talking about political processes. Local government elections were held. We are also seeing movements and preparation for the provincial elections to be held. So what I started, it is a complex process. I think 2-3 years is a very short time span, but we see tremendous progress on the physical side of the work and to move forward. And we believe that we can work with our partners in Sri Lanka to help with the remaining issues, which are a bit complex, but I hope there will be readiness to work on those areas.
So you have served in countries like China and even Vietnam for that matter. Do you see any similarity with the situations in Vietnam and Sri Lanka for that matter?
There are some similarities, but each country has its own very unique features. Similarity that I see, that a very strong resolve to move forward. Both I've seen in Vietnam. Vietnam was also in a very adverse condition. Sri Lanka seen the 30 years of very severe conflict, but both people have a very strong resolve to move forward. So that is one part. What I saw in Sri Lanka and Vietnam in common, Sri Lanka much earlier embraced the market, the world community, tried to be part of the world community. Vietnam also started after 95, and they started to move on those parts. Both countries have a very good track record on poverty alleviation, on achieving social development. If you see that both countries have a very high literacy rates, very good coverage of health services. So there are a lot of, but political system is very different. You started as a pluralistic democracy. Vietnam was not necessarily that one, they have another one. But you see, in terms of state working to improve people's lives, I think Sri Lanka and Vietnam has a lot common in terms of the desire, determination, and social policies to effect.
Let me drag your attention to the Human Development Report 2013, which was unveiled on the 15th of March this year. What are the key findings of this particular report in question?
Yeah, we are very proud that we had a Sri Lanka launch here also on the 2nd of April, which was attended by Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Paris, and we had a very distinguished panel to discuss on it. And the interest on that report stems also from the fact that it tells a success story. Most of the time we pick a report and then we talk about challenges, problems, but this basically gives a good scorecard to the world community. And particularly, if you say that the one finding is that almost all countries, both in the south and the north, have achieved significant human development progress in terms of significant human development improvement. And as you know, that human development essentially, it not only factors in income progress, but also in terms of your life well-beings, how people are living, the living parts of it, social parts of it. So that is the good part, except for 2 countries. all countries globally, they have achieved progress, and we were quite confident of stating that because we were using the data set from 1990. So it's about long period of time, and over this the progress has taken place. Second, the growth has taken place, and in some countries in the south, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, South Africa, Turkey, they have become global powers in terms of the size of the economy, quality of the GDP. But there are also smaller countries also have achieved good progress. My home country Bangladesh is also in that list. Rwanda, a country coming from severe conflict, also in that list. There are small countries also doing pretty well. As much as the economy is growing, but also these countries have managed to reduce poverty. Take China. Over this period, China has reduced poverty. 500 million people have come out of poverty. So these are big numbers. So
as you said, sir, some countries have done better than others. You see Sri Lanka being ranked top among South Asian countries this time around. What can we learn from these countries, and what are the common drivers to this situation?
Yeah, the report deals with that issue pretty extensively, and one is that you were talking about in achieving this social, very high social progress, social indicators, and if I may dwell upon Sri Lanka matter one, and in fact to highlight, Sri Lanka has always been a leader in terms of the Human Development Index in the South Asia region. This time what Sri Lanka has achieved, it has moved from a medium group to high Human Development Index group. So, but then you, in the case of Sri Lanka also from the global practice, if you look at, one is that a state which has a very strong developmental agenda, work on the issues which are putting it behind. So you have done that in Sri Lanka, and all the countries which have succeeded have done that. Second one, again, which sort of drove the progress, is that you are embracing, and there is an existing open global market that countries can produce these things and sell that thing, countries can bring know-how, countries can exchange. So the globalization working to alleviate poverty, achieve social development, that was the second one. Third one, in Sri Lanka and the countries that have succeeded, strong public investment, but public investment that works for also for the poor, in the social sectors, in the education sector, in health sector, social protection, so that you develop your infrastructure, you develop your system, but that also provides services to all citizens. So these are few things that I would name here, which is common for all the countries that have achieved progress. And I served in China 4 years before coming here, and I can also confirm that what I have seen there, and China's progress, is phenomenal. Essentially, these three elements you can draw upon.
We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we discuss more into the Human Development Report 2013 and also the country report on Sri Lanka. Stay connected, stay with Biz First in Focus. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. So, addressing the 2nd of April event in Colombo, you said Sri Lanka's own human development gains, despite the protracted internal conflict, are due to the continued social investments in education and health sector in particular. Did Sri Lanka achieve this growth following the end of the conflict, or was it a long-standing progress that we saw in the Human Development Report 2012?
Well, short answer is that it has been a trend in Sri Lanka from very beginning. Very early of Sri Lanka statehood, the social policy decision, in my view, was far sighted. There was an emphasis and focus on investing in social sectors. You have free education, you have free healthcare, and it has been a legacy for quite some time. So you basically had a fairly strong social capital in terms of literate people, in terms of healthy people, And that's probably and explains that even during the protracted year, those gains of probably were a little eroded, but still you maintain a robust pace. So it's slightly longer term.
So when you really look at the United Nations and the recent statements that were out from the Secretary General's office and even the spokesperson's office during the recent past, you see the manner in which how they have criticized the activities of the Sri Lankan government. What is the reason behind this?
Maybe here I need to maintain that you see United Nations as created by its member states, including Sri Lanka, it has different functions. Of course, one pillar is the development, and then we have been so far talking about developmental part. Another one was peacekeeping, another one is human rights and security. So I think the issues that you hear, particularly in some of the statements in the discussion of the Human Rights Council, essentially relates to these other blocks, where it is, again, I must mention that these are intergovernmental processes, and United Nations is the convener and venue of it. So intergovernmental processes, there are some issues raised, and we are in discussion. The country team here essentially focuses on the developmental part. I, as the resident coordinator and representative of the Secretary General, make sort of a maintain liaison on the other part, the political and human rights part. So those discussions are more related to the political processes and human rights.
What can Sri Lanka do, sir, relating to sustaining the human development for the generations to come?
Well, I think it's not only for Sri Lanka but also for all countries who have achieved progress. I mean, sometimes you achieve progress but you cannot maintain it, it just falls. One would be to address the issues of inequality, and it is across the board. It's not only for Sri Lanka. I think that we are seeing, as much as we are growing affluent, but also you see that divide is increasing. Divide between the rich and the poor, divide by men and women, rural and urban. Those inequalities needs to be addressed. So social policies to address that those gaps don't widen will be one important factor. The second one will be the participation and representation, so that when you achieve progress, it is owned by everyone. And I think in the context of Sri Lanka, what I have seen very progressive signs, very hopeful signs, that engaging young people. Because at this point of time, the whole world is talking about what should be the development agenda beyond 2015. And in Sri Lanka, for example, we are trying that young people also shape that agenda. So the empowering them, securing their participation and representation in decision making will be important, that it should be broad based. And third element would be environment. I must say that in Sri Lanka probably you are doing fairly well compared to many other countries, and you have I think it's in your tradition, very strong tradition, that taking care of the environment. And when I travel around, I can see that the way people take care of the environment, but still not to be complacent. I think your energy balance is very much fossil fuel based, and we should be looking at more renewable energy and things like that. And you see, you are an island, we are in an island, but we are part of the one common home that we call the earth, and there are processes going on, global warming going on, and I think we see in Sri Lanka also there are droughts and floods in a recurring cycle. So the environmental or sustainable part should be one. And the fourth one, which is I would like to mention here, which is not only for any particular country, some revisiting of the global governance agenda, how the development agenda is shaped globally. For example, I mentioned about 2015 work. There should be much more participation of all countries. Much as that we talk within the country participation for all, when you talk about a global community, there should be more equitable participation in decision making and shaping the future. So I probably will mention these things, which not only are pertinent for Sri Lanka but for all who have achieved progress and to maintain those.
During the last 2 years, when you took over office in Sri Lanka as a representative to the United Nations Development Program, do you think the Sri Lankan government would have done more to improve the human development in every individual in the country?
You know, I'll give you a little indirect answer in that sense, because my job or the job of my colleagues, we are sent to a country not to assess how well they are doing and how well they are not doing. We are not evaluators here. We are sent to work with the country, with the government, they are our host government, to work with them to set priorities, and where there are gaps, where from our mandate, from our resources, from our expertise, we can bring that. So on that score, I think the new 5-year program that I mentioned at the very beginning is in essence an agenda that government wants United Nations to work on.
Have you been able to table this particular reporting question to the government authorities and get their feedback on it, sir?
The Global Human Development Reporting?
That's right.
Yes, we shared that one. In fact, we also did, in 2012, we launched Sri Lanka's National Human Development Report, where we talked about the issues of inequality, where we talked about the issues of disparity, where we talked about the issues to focus on those issues to narrow the divide. So yes, we have a very frank, constructive dialogue where we don't enter into a dialogue to assess something. We enter into a dialogue that these are the things Sri Lankan government can do, Sri Lankan government has undertaken to do under certain obligation. You know, Sri Lanka has signed almost all major human rights and developmental conventions. So we work in that way, that on the side that, okay, we are here to work with you. But as you mentioned, that we do not put a scorecard, what has happened, what has not. I don't think that is fair for our part to do.
We're now going for another short commercial break. We're talking with Subramanian Nandi, the UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative in Sri Lanka. Stay connected, stay with Biz First in Focus. We will be right back. Welcome back to Biz First in Focus. So Sri Lanka is on a development drive currently. How important is it to maintain reconciliation and accountability in the country?
Well, if you see some of the pronouncements and statements and policies of the government, I think the issues are very highly emphasized and acknowledged. So that I wanted to just to remind ourselves, on the 26th of May 2009, immediately after the closure of end of the war, the Secretary General, United Nations Secretary General, came to Sri Lanka. He probably was the first high-level visitor just after the war, and there was an important joint communique that was agreed to between the government of Sri Lanka, His Excellency the President, and the United Nations Secretary General. And that, if you ask me, that probably lays out the ways to work, and the issues that you mentioned, reconciliation, accountability, also along with resettlement and reconstruction, were the areas that were full acknowledgement of the government was underlined. So I don't think there is any debate on that, how it is needed or not. Now, how we act on those, that is the crux of the matter. Now, on that part also, particularly on reconciliation, I think if you take another government document, the work by the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, LLRC, and the report that came out in December 2011, again probably gives a good roadmap to do work on that part. Now, there has been a lot of discussion between the Sri Lankan government and international community, but it's probably less important what is the discussion between the Sri Lankan government and international community.
So let me interrupt you for a second there. The United Nations have been continuously saying, along with the international community, that Sri Lanka has not made progress as far as reconciliation and accountability is concerned. You've been a top diplomat attached to the United Nations for many, many years. I want to know, what is the yardstick in which progress is being measured?
Well, on the reconciliation part, I think the take that we have, United Nations continues to offer support. Just take one issue, that one United Nations agency is working with government in tracking the missing children, right? Because this is when you bring a closure, psychological closure to someone who has been resettled, who has gotten back to her land, but then those things have to be done. So those elements of reconciliation we are doing. We are doing quite a number of work on tuning, school tuning. We are bringing school kids from south to the north in other way. So building a common platform for people to understand what is happening.
My question to you is, what is the yardstick in which progress is being measured? Because the government is saying that following the end of the conflict, there has been some sort of progress that has been achieved in terms of reconciliation, accountability, and you also agreed at the start of the interview that Sri Lanka has been resettling almost all the IDPs who were left destitute following the end of the conflict. My question to you is, sir, what is the yardstick in which progress is being measured as far as reconciliation and accountability is concerned? How will Sri Lanka know that they have achieved progress?
Well, there are certain commitments that, for example, on the political side, like holding of elections, holding implementation of some constitutional provision. These are some of the things are actually in your constitutions, right? Holding an election and local government election are done. So this is essentially the time frame is to be defined nationally, and I don't think the international community is in any way, or United Nations is not a party to setting a time frame. LLRC recommendation also talked about immediate things to be done, and then, you know, as you probably know, that there was an action plan, LLRC action plan. So probably the government, and in fact government in charge of it, defined the yardstick and time frame, and I think the discussion from our side is essentially the implementation of that one. I will probably refrain from commenting on the accountability part, because this is not my area or mandated area, and I have not much of expertise, but concerned United Nations agencies, they dealing with human rights and the political rights, they deal with that. So I'll probably, it will not be fair on my to comment.
My final question to you is, what is the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka, which eradicated terrorism in 2009?
I think every country decides on its own way forward. We believe that it will be helpful to act on the plans that have been rolled out. LLRC is probably one. The commitments that have been made, for example, 26th May communique, between the very high level communique. So if you act on those and there is evident results and progress on those parts, I think that is where to go. I don't think you need to devise on new instruments and new commitments. There is enough commitment, enough provisions as to what could form a base for moving forward. The constitutional provisions that they have, that the discussion, the political process of negotiating between different parties you have, and those beginnings have been made, and I think they need to be brought to a closure. Yeah, then you see that probably that will give the results that you are seeking for.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining us right here on Biz First InFocus.
Thank you so much for having us here.